we're going to start off with understanding the concept of a conflict as it is in real life and also why it's important for the team. So first of all, I'd like to ask you, so just whoever wants to answer, why we use conflict resolution games in UAP.
I would say that generally during the committee work, you're going to have conflicts and you want to have a mean to deal with those. And the aim of that part of team building is to give the committee the tools to, like, not only to give, first of all, the committee the situation where they have a conflict, so they have already encountered that before they get into the committee work, and also to give them the tools to deal with the kind of conflict. So it's like, I don't know, time management tools, but also like this deciding how to move forward and how to get a compromise and all the things like that.
Perfect, exactly. So it's something that I think it's important to communicate to the rest of trainees as well, because a lot of times I hear in UAV that, oh, my committee is doing amazing, I don't think we need a conflict, because conflict is going to break them, it's going to kind of ruin the mood, and I just want them to have fun and go on being as happy as they are right now. In which case, I mean, of course, they can do whatever they want, and perhaps it works for them. However, as Ricardo perfectly pointed out, conflict games are very useful for us because it helps us to improve the situation, the status quo in the community, and really push on the strengths and make the strengths even better than they are, while also pointing out the little weaknesses and making sure that we work out through these weaknesses and move forward without them. And conflict games are perfect for this because we are simulating the situation which can perhaps happen in the future, or we can use conflict games to point out the problems like that are happening right now. So you can kind of spot the sickness of the community and understand that they are not really getting the point, that they are going through a little bit of an issue, and then you can use conflict game to point out that there is something going on at the moment, as well as you can just use the conflict game in order to make sure that they are more prepared for a potential conflict in the future. And in terms of, so this is just a little bit of a summary. We can transform what exists into something better, get a chance to know our team better, as well as build trust and reveal the reaction to a potential conflict. Now we would like to move on to the components of the conflict in order to understand the nature of a conflict game and how to kind of approach it from the right angle according to the right situation. So let's start with communication. Communication is perhaps like, it could be a strength and a weakness of a conflict game, because it could be that the team is experiencing really bad miscommunication and people don't listen to each other, in which case we can use a communication game to improve it. But it also can be strength for us because we can use a communication game even when the communication is going okay, as a tool to make sure that it continues going this way, or in order to enforce the situation that is already there. Then there is a component of competition. That is not going to happen in Yerevan, but that happens a lot at other UAP sessions. Because when we have a committee where people are getting selected, this competitive mode very often leads to the conflict because people want their personalities to shine bright, and they want the jury team to really pay attention to them. And very often it leads to conflicts because people might act a little bit fake and a little bit in the artificial way because they want to show like the best sides of them. The next component, which I feel like is very often seen in the teams, not particularly in the committee, but in officials teams, is inconsistency, because very often we have perhaps some delays or miscommunication, and sometimes we have a part of the program which got interrupted and other people don't know about this, which can lead to conflict, not particularly in the committee, but in between the teams of officials. So in this case, it's also important to understand that we can use this module not only for a committee, but also on a broader scale, and understand like the nature of the conflict and how we can deal with it. So inconsistency is one of them. Diversity is more appropriate for Yerevan because our committees are going to be consisted of the people from all over Europe. And because of that, we have a bit of a struggle because some cultures are very different and delegates can sometimes have misunderstanding just because of the lack of cultural understanding. And because of this diversity, we can sometimes get into conflict. So it would be important for us to also introduce games which show that diversity can also be a huge strength and point out that delegates can really benefit from having a diverse team. And that also actually translates to other teams, to official team as well, because we have a diversity of skills, a diversity of perceptions, and we can use it in order to enforce the experience for the whole session. The next component is perspective. So once again, we can have a problem with perspective because of the fact that we have people from different backgrounds, but also people from different social and educational perspectives. And they have a different angle on the topic sometimes. And some people would say that that's weird, that you don't understand because this is factual, while others would find this like, you know, maybe having a moral debate and so on. So the perspective is a huge component for conflict. And you can also have different games which target the perspective particularly so that people can understand that we all have different perspectives and we can somehow work together in order to get a consensus on it. Interdependency, that's also something more relevant to the whole officials team rather than just the delegates, because interdependency is something that has to do with people having different tasks and how one officials team has, you know, so like one team is dependent on the other team. For example, media team maybe is dependent on chairs sometimes for their projects, and lack of this dependent, like no, not lack of dependency, but too much of interdependency can lead to conflicts as well, because it means that some people cannot get their job done because of other people. So in this case, if you feel like you have interdependency issue as a team leader, you can also have games which show people that we can somehow solve this issue by a better communication and understanding our responsibilities. And the last one is emotional intelligence, which I believe is the key to relieving any conflict in the team, because by participating in EVP sessions, delegates very often enhance their emotional intelligence, and the conflict games are a huge part of this, because we use conflict games in order to make people understand other people's perspectives, other people's emotions, and in this way we understand, we develop our empathy, but we also develop better understanding of how we can work professionally with people of different backgrounds, of different emotional states, and that makes us better human beings and enhances our emotional intelligence. And I know that's a lot right now, and as the man on the GIF is being confused, I believe you might be as well, but we will go through all of these components separately, and we will take a look at how we can target specifically different components in order to let our team experience it and understand how they can work through it. So far, do you guys have any questions? No? Okay. So the next thing that I would like to talk about is selecting an appropriate conflict resolution game. So as you can see, there is a weird looking shrimp running on this machine, and I chose this GIF for a particular reason, actually, because I don't believe that this shrimp can benefit a lot from this treadmill, and I don't think that it will make it better. It's just a very useless exercise for this shrimp. And I'm not comparing delegates to shrimps right here. I'm just saying that not always the exercises and activities that we choose, unfortunately, are appropriate for the team that we are leading. And that's why I want us to talk about understanding how to tailor appropriate activities to the needs of our team. So, oh, sorry. So first of all, here are the main goals that I would say we need in EVP for conflict activities. So there are different in different circumstances. For example, in the work environment or in school, you might have different goals. But for us in EVP and especially in Yerevan, we will need to make sure that people over this 2 weeks, actually less than 2 weeks, they can work together well and they can enjoy this experience to the fullest extent. And for us to reach this goal, I would say that we need to build trust. We need to improve the emotional intelligence. We need to enhance verbal and nonverbal communication, challenge assumptions, provide perspective, foster collaboration, and appreciate diversity. Now, this is a lot, of course, and you can, I mean, sometimes you want to really reach all of these things because you understand that your team is lacking all of them. But in my opinion, you have to really prioritize because especially the ISs, you have delegates who have been selected and lots of them are already on a very good level of emotional intelligence and understanding how to cooperate well in the team. So don't waste your time on the activities that already you feel like it will be useless for your team particularly. So analyzing your teams throughout the first stages of team building is important, understanding the vibe and reading the room, reading the committee, understanding what are their strengths and what are their weaknesses. And once you understand that, for example, your team doesn't, let's say, appreciate diversity, but it's really good in terms of providing, like, they understand each other's assumptions well, and they have a good, for example, emotional intelligence, but they just don't understand each other's potential. Then you can really spot this weakness and have a game which targets specifically this lack of understanding how amazing the fact that they have a diverse team is. In that case, you would go for an activity that targets that. If you, for example, have a team that doesn't really feel like that doesn't have like a perspective problem, so it's especially common in the teams, in the committees where there are moral issues and moral debates in the committee, and then half of the team is, for example, having a very radical idea that is totally opposite to another half of the team. In this case, you really need to work on making people come up with the consensus and providing perspective, while also like fostering their collaboration. So in that case, you would need to go for a different spectrum of the games. Now, in order to prepare for this well, you can already start with the pre-session preparation. You can already start with asking your delegate committee related questions while you're Skyping with them or asking them on Slack or whatever your communication platform is, in order to right away understand what delegates have, what kind of perspectives, and so you can also anticipate the conflict even before the session, that you know that, oh, I have a lot of people who are very radical from others. In that case, you can prepare ahead, which is very convenient. But for the rest of the situations, I would say you just need to read the room and be prepared on the spot. And so for that, it's always great to have a couple of conflict games prepared beforehand, so you can you can see what exactly your team needs at that moment and choose the appropriate conflict game for that. So so far, do you guys have any questions? Okay, I hope it's a no and not my sound not working. Okay, so the next thing that we are going to discuss is actual games, and I wouldn't say even games, but since we are not, we don't have a lot of time, we're going to speak mostly about how to choose an appropriate activity. And also, we're not going to talk about the games because that's going to take a lot of time in terms of like, actually instructions to the games. But we will talk about how we use this game to debrief it properly and to make the team reflect on it properly. So here are, I would say that the main, not the main, but the most common IS objectives for a committee. So for example, you know for sure that you will want your delegates to build consensus, you will want them to practice the skills of dialogue, you will want them to work through conflict, and you will want them to to reach like a team goal and to have a look at the big picture benefits of effective conflict resolution. So these are the definite objectives, I would say, for the IS committee, but also for other committees as well, not just international sessions. And what we're going to do right now, we're going to go through these objectives and see potential activities, but also how would we structure our post-activity questions in order to reflect to them. So let's start with the objective, which is to solve a different problem as a team, difficult problem as a team, to share information and to overcome frustration and listen effectively. That objective very often happens when we have something that is already happening. So if you can see that your team is doing the discussion and or doing like selection after brainstorming, and they are frustrated because they cannot come up with the solution, and you can see that they're not moving anywhere, perhaps you would need to debrief this, and for that you would need to have a game, of course, because debriefing usually helps when you simulate the situation and help your team see the things they haven't realized themselves. So in this case, what kind of activity do you think would be appropriate for these specific objections? Is anyone here?
So if this is so as well as far as I understood, it's something that happens already in the committee work. So then you probably don't want to waste too much time from the committee work. So maybe something like a short game that is rather simple and just pretty much shows the mood of the committee at that certain point, which is like, for example, kill a baby, or some of those that just show what's going on, but don't go into too much detail because they don't need to understand how they work. They already know that. They just kind of need to see what's happening.
Cool. Anyone else? Okay, perfect. So thank you, Ala. That was a very good understanding of what you have to do during the situation. I mean, definitely you need some kind of short activity, perhaps, and you need to make sure that they see that there is a lot of frustration happening. Now, once you have done this activity, how would you make them understand, how would you point out the frustration, and how would you lead them towards working through this frustration? What kind of questions would you ask in this situation? Okay, I would say I can share the questions that I would ask, and you can agree or disagree with me on this. So, for example, we go through the activity, as Allah said, not too time consuming if we are short of time. If you have a lot of time, then go for a longer one. And then the appropriate questions always target the results of this activity, and they always have to lead committed to understanding exactly the challenges that they're going through. So I would say that asking these questions, like how do questioning skills help us understand, and oh, sorry, that's this one. Okay, so first of all, what was challenging about this game, and then they can say that it was challenging because we were all frustrated with each other, and then you can ask about how this experience can translate into the real life, how well did they do, how could they have done it differently, and then just asking the question of the particular problems that they have experienced will make them understand and reflect on it a lot better. And that, like, understanding it by yourself is what makes people learn the best. And that's what makes people really take this experience and getting rid of it. I mean, the negative experience, of course. So the point of this is to make people realize it themselves, because very often chairpersons would go through the activity, and then once they start discussing questions, they just would say that, oh, you know what, like, you haven't done this and that. Why don't you start planning? Why don't you start strategizing? Why don't you start listening to each other? And that is not a very good technique, because if delegates just hear it from you, they would perhaps not be as strongly motivated to follow this as if they were doing it by figuring it out themselves. So let's try another exercise. Your objective is to practice questioning and clarification skills, which is very common during discussions, for example, because some delegates have better skills when it comes to argumenting and making their statement clear, while others have great ideas, but they don't really have a skill of making their thoughts as clear and as understandable. So others don't really feel like it's a good idea, while in reality they just didn't have a good technique for that. So sometimes it's good for us to also create activities to practice this kind of skills. And for those things, for those activities and games, the questions that we would like is, do question skills help us understand, for example, or what other skills are necessary to overcome assumptions? What is the value of questioning skills to resolve conflicts? And what gets in the way of our willingness to ask questions when we are involved in conflict situations? So again, these questions are specifically tailored to the objectives that we have. And this is something that I think is perhaps the most underrated thing in UAP, is understanding how we can tailor questions and actually coming up with objectives before we start the activity. So yeah, before we move on to the third exercise, that's just the message I would like to be heard across, that you have to really dedicate yourself to setting up the objectives before you start any kind of activity. So if you can see that they don't listen to each other, or you can see that people don't ask each other questions because they are not interested in each other's opinions, perhaps that's like a red light that you need to take into account and take an activity game that will really target this issue. And then you can build your questions on that. And let's go to the, I think this is the last exercise, which is to overcome communication challenges, appreciate everyone's contribution, succeed with a difficult task. So that's very common for EVP as well. And again, we cannot really come up with questions beforehand, but those are just the questions that you can prepare and see whether the results that you have really match with the questions that you would like to ask. So some of the potential questions for this objective is, Why was the communication challenging? What did you overcome? What did you do to overcome those challenges? And in what ways did you affect the communication, or challenges sometimes lead into conflict? How did this happen? What did you do? So make sure. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me? Okay. Something happened with the microphone, but okay, looks like it's working. Yeah, so discussion questions are playing a huge role. This is just an overview. We're going to move into the discussion questions a bit later as well, but the point I'm trying to make is that making the questions tailored to objectives is important, but making questions tailored to the results of the activity is vital, because unless you do that, you cannot really move your team forward, and you cannot really make them understand the things that you wanted them to be recognizing in the first place. Okay, well, that's a diversity objective, and for the game, which would be tailored to making people appreciate the diversity and extend trust. Some of the potential questions that you could ask after this game, of course, is whether they were surprised at how many things they had in common, how it could promote unity of the team, or, for example, how can it benefit the team, and hopefully it will make people realize that in reality having a diverse team is a privilege, and it can benefit the team in achieving their goal and making them even stronger. Now, the problem with all of this is that once you have all of these questions to the committee, very often they get frustrated, and they start to go like through the all kind of feelings and emotions, which those gifts are showing the most common, perhaps, that people are very unhappy because nobody ever listens to them, and they wouldn't want to be a part of this anymore, and everything was just horrible. They hated this activity. And what scares me is that so often people just start the activity, and the activity seems, the conflict has been reached. People started to understand that they are very different. Some people are shouting, others are disrespecting other opinions. Some people are just silently sitting there, not bothering. And once you ask a couple of questions, people are showing their frustration. And then I can very often see how chairs just leave it there. So people just get rid of these feelings, and they're like, oh, we hated it, I don't understand this person is horrible, nobody ever listens to me. And then chairs would say very commonly, let's not make this happen again. Let's just be more respectful to each other, and let's learn how to listen to each other, and let's hug. And that's it. And that kills me very much, because without a proper debriefing, without really going in depth and asking the right questions and analyzing the results of this conflict, there is no point in doing the conflict game in the first place. And the game will be just the game, and nothing will be learned. It's just a waste of time. So if you're doing a conflict activity game, then you just must do debriefing, because otherwise you will not reach any result, you will not enhance the performance, and you can actually risk having a broken team after that, because you will just put them in the conflict. People will just hate each other, and they will not understand how they can learn from it, which is why you as a facilitator is perhaps the most important part of a conflict activity, because you have the power of shaping this conflict game and shaping your team in a way that they can use it to become strong, powerful, and motivated. And that's what your goal has to be, because you are doing it for a specific objective.
as we have already discussed this, and leaving it without people understanding this objective and without understanding how they can learn from this experience, in my opinion, is an EVP crime. So please don't do this. Let's go through the debriefing kind of must-dos right now and see how it can help you and your team actually learn from the experience they have just had. So what is the most common debriefing activity we do in EVP? Can anyone tell me, please?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
I can't hear you.
Is it?
Wait a second. Maybe I have troubles with my headphones.
I can hear both fine from my side.
Okay. Yeah, I was saying, can you hear me now, Mariam?
Can you say it again?
No, I was saying that I'm not sure I understood the question. Like, did you ask about the structure that we use, or?
Yes. So, like, very often we have a debriefing set of questions. Can anyone say how they're called?
Well, generally we use the 4Fs. So,
yes.
like, we start from the facts, and then the feelings, and then the findings, and then the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Cool. And how do you feel about this structure? Do you think it works for you? Has it worked in the previous experience?
Generally, I think that it has worked for me. Like, especially, it's important. I think that it's very important to divide the debriefing in different categories, because, like, if you just mix the facts and the future and the things you can do and how people felt about things, it's just a big mess.
Mm-hmm.
And at the beginning, it's very important to identify what happens, and then it's important to think about how you want to move on. I mean, I'm sure that the facts and the future part are the most important of the structure. At times, I felt like the feelings and the findings were a bit redundant, but at the same time, like, the facts and the future are extremely important, because without those parts, the debriefing makes no sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, the 4Fs is an amazing structure. I would say that it's the foundation, but I would say that we have to learn how to extend these 4Fs into a variety of questions which are specifically targeted to what your committee has done. And that's when a very important tasks comes to the facilitator, because unless you have observed the conflict and unless you have paid a strong attention to what your committee is doing, you can perhaps not ask more questions than the 4Fs. And you will just go through all of the 4Fs, which are also great, but it wouldn't allow you to dive a little bit deeper and really target those weak, small spots which you have noticed. So when I see sometimes chairpersons leave the committee when they give, for example, Abigail, and they're like, okay, you have 10 minutes to discuss, and then they come back and they go through the list of, like, from the most guilty to the least guilty. And that's another EVP crime for me, because you as a facilitator must stay in the committee and observe how everyone is interacting with each other. You can also use the blind debriefing and ask people about their feelings when they're, like, anonymous, but also, of course, you can make it more public. It's up to you how you want to make it work. But the point is that you must stay there and you must really pay attention to what is happening and take notes, because then you can use this as a platform for your questions, because you can use those things you have noticed in order to specify and ask them to elaborate on them. So here are some of the main points of facilitation. As I've said, that the conflict is only it can only work if you have a person that facilitates it properly. So it's a great it's a great responsibility on the chairperson, because, or any other team leader who is doing a conflict resolution activity, because if you have decided to make this activity happen, you must be very emotionally intelligent, you must be understanding of people's interaction, taking notes, and understanding how to move them towards the understanding that what happened and how they can learn from it. That's not easy, and there is no, perhaps that's why debriefing is one of the most challenging things that we as EVPers find, because there is no just brief instruction on how to do debriefing, because you have to use your personal active listening skills and your personal observation skills in order to really read the room, and that takes practice, but it also takes your will to understand what's happening. So unless you are interested in helping the team, you will not be a good facilitator. Okay, the next thing is that games, the games will remain games without a good debriefing discussion, which I have already mentioned. So you also have to kind of anticipate the probable results. For that reason, we went through the objectives and questions exercise. So it would be good for you to prepare beforehand by asking yourself, what would you like your committee's objectives be, and how would you like to structure it? How would you like to structure your debriefing discussion based on these objectives? And of course, taking notes through the activity so that you can really understand what's happening better. So in my opinion, this beautiful GIF represents what debriefing is. I know it's a little weird, I'm sorry, but I felt like it was perfect, because on the one side we have a world, a universe of conflict, and then on the other side we have the universe of debriefing, and then together they unite and create a totally new universe that is going to be the committee work after the debriefing, which is going to be a lot more interesting, a lot more effective, because the team will be able to understand their weaknesses and understand their strengths so that they can actually become a better team. And they will be really motivated once they understand that, wow, we have just realized so much and we can really move forward with this knowledge. Let's get empowered and let's do this in a totally different way. So what are the golden rules of debriefing? I know I've said it already, but I'm going to say it a lot of times so that everyone really remembers it, is that taking notes is a must do, because as much as your memory might be amazing, you will never remember everything, unfortunately. And because of that, it's really helpful if you take notes and make things a little bit more objective, because sometimes our memory tends to kind of, collapse the situation in a way that we think that happened, but in the reality it didn't happen. It's just our memory messing up with us. So taking notes makes it a little bit better. Then the debriefing is getting participants to discuss what happened in the game, what they learned, and how the learning applies in the committee work. That's another must do of debriefing. I would encourage you, of course, because that's the point, is to make people speak, and you can make them speak by asking open-ended questions. Open-ended questions means that they have to end not with yes or no, but with an open answer, so that they can elaborate on their feelings using some more of a descriptive language. So it would be great if you told participants to tell about their experience and how it relates to the real life situation, so how it relates to the committee work. So in case someone says that, oh, we have, for example, quite a lot of people who are just interrupting each other, while others are afraid of speaking because of these really loud people, how can it translate to the committee work? Does it mean that those people who are a little bit more who are shyer than those who are louder, does it mean that they will have troubles with speaking their mind? Why is it a problem? What can we do about this? The next thing is adapting ideas to what really happened in each game and what is really happening in the committee work. So understanding that all circumstances will differ, but this experience is still relatable. And the last thing is encouraging participants to consider the following questions. What will we remember from the game tomorrow? What can we take from this experience? And how can we use the experience to improve our team's performance, which is pretty much the last F, the future, let's say, of the debriefing. And this is quite important because I like to start off, for example, the next day with this question. Like yesterday we had this activity, what have you learned from it? Do you guys remember? So making sure that you always reflect on the activities and your delegates always remember what they have learned is vital, because only this way they will be able to reinforce the ideas that you tried them to come across. So in summary, that's it. So we have the conflicts, which are like vaccines for our team. In why the term vaccine is appropriate is because also from what Ricardo said in the very beginning, conflicts, like we are simulating something that might potentially happen. And you can have a committee which is doing great and they love each other and they might go through the rest of the committee work being just fine and being a perfect communication team and everything is working out well. But you never know what if just in the middle of committee work people start fighting and they weren't prepared for this. So just because we never know what's going to happen, it's good for us to vaccinate our delegates and our teams so that they know what could potentially happen. But it's also good for us to use those games and these activities because we want to show people that there is always room for improvement, and we want to enhance their emotional intelligence. We want to help them be a little bit more appreciative of each other and trust each other a little bit more. And for this thing, you can always use a game in any situation. You can, I mean, not in any situation, but of course, if you see that some difficulties are happening and you want people to realize that these difficulties are happening, perhaps a conflict resolution game would be appropriate. Or if you can see that in like tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, you will have this really challenging discussion, and you are anticipating that people might be struggling with finding consensus, perhaps it would be good if you prepare for it ahead and gave them a conflict resolution game so that once they encounter this in real life, they're not as broken by it. Second summary is that understanding your goals and adjusting game to the needs of the committee is important, because unless you do that, it's going to be a waste of time for you and for your delegates, and it's just not going to help nobody and can even damage the experience. So unless you want that to happen, you have to adjust your game to the needs of the committee. Last two things are asking questions is significant about the results, and reflecting and reminding your team about the findings throughout the process. So with that, I would say that's it. And I would say goodbye, although it breaks my heart. But now it's going to be open for the questions. So I'm gonna stop recording. Just a second. Yes, so if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask them right now.